Now let's learn how to fill another block with an independent filler design. This time we're working with Wandering Clover, which is essentially a design created using stippling, and then every once in a while you branch off with 3 little loops to create a clover patch. So I'm just taking this kind of wiggly design all the way up to the flower circle, of course, just like we did with the lollipop chain section quilted block. And we're just filling this little area in very, very quickly, and then going to, of course, stitch in the ditch around the flower shape. I've edited that part out simply because we've already seen it, but I do want to show you how I connected the leaves to the stem with this filler design, and you can see that here. It's just a very short little wiggly chain, and then every once in a while branch out with 3 little loops of your clover patch. And I know that this is stitched very, very quickly simply because I'm trying to conserve time on these videos, but I hope that you can see how simple and easy this is. Stippling is one of the most popular free motion quilting designs, and the reason for that is that it is so easy to put it just about anywhere on your quilt. And that also means that any design created off of it, so Wandering Clover is a very easy variation of stippling. Any design created off of the base of stippling is going to work very similarly. So of course, Wandering Clover will work anywhere on any scale in your quilt. So now I've cut again, and we've gone back to the starting point. We've stitched the ditch around the entire block, and now you can see I'm just kind of wiggling in here, of course still really fast. I really wish that we could all quilt this quickly, but it doesn't work that way. But I'm just kind of squishing this Wandering Clover line into this area. I'm still using the edges of the flower and the edges of the block that I've stitched in the ditch as areas to travel against. But more than anything else, what I'm focusing on is keeping my lines a consistent distance away. So as I'm wiggling around with stippling, I'm making sure to keep my stippling lines about 1/8 of an inch apart. This is pretty dense, but I wanted it to be consistent with the other filler designs used in this whole quilt. You'll notice also how flat this texture is already becoming. It doesn't draw very much attention, and it is very, very flat and wants to recede into the background. And that's just simply one of those things about stippling. When you look at it, especially if it's been put into a block, it just seems to want to flatten the area and recede into the background. It's far less attention getting than the other design that we've seen, Lollipop Chain. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad design. I think that looking at textures as far as what kind of texture you're wanting in what particular area is very important. So this is a great design if you're wanting an area that's more calm, that's flat, that's going to recede, that isn't going to draw a lot of attention, that isn't going to compete with your block or your appliques. This is a really, really great choice for somewhere where you just want to tone things down a little bit. Maybe if you're using really wild fabrics and really wild thread, you might want to tone your design down, your actual quilting design down a little bit, so that way it's not just entirely overwhelming. That's just a nice idea. Here you can really see how I'm just kind of filling the Wandering Clover in a row to fill in that whole corner, and now I'm going to start stitching down and around this leaf shape. It's important to keep in mind how often you stitch your little clover shape. I'm stitching mine about every 1/2 of an inch or so, so just kind of wiggling around a little bit and then randomly positioning a clover shape just whenever I felt like it. But it's good to kind of keep that in mind of that you're consistently putting them in. You wouldn't want to suddenly have 2 or 3 inches where you didn't have any clover patches at all, because that just really wouldn't be very consistent. Consistency more than anything else is key, and I've said that word a lot, so that's definitely something that's important. Consistent distances, consistent texture, consistent spacing of your shapes, all of those things come together to create a filler design that really fills your area and looks like one solid texture. So here you can see I'm squishing this little line into that tight area, traveling against that leaf shape to get back out again, and then filling the rest of that area in. It's very quick, it's very fast. This block still did take about an hour to fill completely, just like the lollipop chain block did. You don't, of course, have to fill it this densely. That would take far less time if you had a little bit more space between your lines of stitching, and it would probably take up a lot less thread as well. The only thing you really need to keep in mind if you decide to go on a wider scale, a bigger scale for your design, is how you're going to fill the tight areas, how you can keep those consistent, because you'll end up having to chop your design in half, or you'll end up having to travel along the edges of the block or the edges of the applique a lot more in order to fill the tight area. So like the tight area around the leaf or the tight area around the circular flower shape. You'll have to do a lot more wiggling and fitting if your design is on a larger scale. And I really wanted you to be able to see the texture that this creates on a small scale, because I think it's absolutely gorgeous. This is the way I love to stitch, this is the way I love to quilt, and I wanted to share that with you. It's not for everybody, but it is absolutely positively my favorite way to quilt. So now we're actually going to move on and see what we do to the flowers, because we have these big giant circular flower shapes on these blocks, and we need to figure out a way of filling those and with some sort of texture. And I decided that the easiest way really to fill these areas, because I wanted this to be relatively open, was just to simply stitch in the ditch around the outer flower area. You can see me doing that now, and then to stitch in the ditch around the center circle. But in order to, really minimize a thread break there, I decided to stitch, kind of creating these petals in between the dips of this applique flower. So I'm stitching in the ditch all around this area, and it's very slow. I've slowed this down to normal speed again, and I'm being very, very careful to stay right on the outside of that applique, so that way I don't stitch inside of it and on top of that layer of fabric. And it's really nice because appliques are easier to stitch in the ditch because they have that very clear raised area that you can kind of butt your needle up against. But I'm going to create these lines, and you can see I've actually marked them on the flower shape. And I do that because straight lines are one of those things that's really easy to get off, and even if they're slightly off, you can see it about 1.5 miles away. So I marked mine, and I would say definitely feel free to mark yours. Mark your lines, and that way you can really easily see where you're stitching. Go inside, and what you do is you stitch straight out to that petal dip, to that line, and then stitch straight back, just traveling right on top of that line. Continue around your inner circle and stitch out again. It does make it a lot easier to stitch with those lines marked, but after I got finished stitching this whole thing, I looked at it and thought, it would have been kind of nice to have some of those lines be curvy, having a curvy line radiating out from the center flower. So that just lets you know, with texture, there is always room to play. There is always room to experiment and try something new. I wanted to leave the flowers relatively open, but I could have easily filled this area. I could have filled the flowers with another filler design. I could have filled the circle, the pink area of this block, with another filler design. I could have filled the center circle, that tiny 1-inch diameter circle, with another filler as well. So there's always areas of your quilt that you can fill with texture if you choose to. And it, of course, will then change the look and the dynamic of that block the more texture and thread you add to it. So here's what it looks like when you finish your block stitched section quilting style with wandering clover. Don't miss out on the next video in this series. Definitely go to daystyledesigns.com, where you will find over 200 videos on free motion quilting, this series, and loads of tools and supplies for free motion quilting.